Hello, welcome to the first webinar of 2023. My name is Michael Kramer, and I am presenting today on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. Thank you all for logging in with us. For you first timers, just a couple tidbits here. This webinar is actually being recorded. You can extract this webinar from our website shortly after today's presentation, or if you like to extract just the slides, just go to our website and follow the webinar tab. Currently, everybody is muted. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I cannot hear you though. There is a question tab on your screen there. Feel free to utilize that. Please keep questions in regards to our topic today, which we're going to be bouncing all over 17025. And at the conclusion of the presentation, I will be able to pull up the questions and go through them and answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you again for joining us. So today's webinar is sort of like same as exactly what we did last year during 2022. We look back at the previous year. So in this case here, we're going to look back of our assessments that PJLA conducted in regards to 17025 2017. And we compiled some data. And from this data, I was able to extract the top 10 list here. So this is the top 10 list of nonconformances. So these are sections of the standard which PJLA assessors wrote during the year. And by top 10, that is in numbers. So we're going to start at the number 10 and work our way to the section number 1, which had the most nonconformances. So this is kind of different in that we're going to be bouncing all over the standard because there's 10 different sections we're going to look at. What I'm going to do is present them and then perhaps go through some of the clauses and maybe hit on some problem areas, which I feel, maybe given some organizations some difficulties. Perhaps you're a new accreditation or where some of this may be new to you, but hopefully even the veteran folks out there that's been accredited for a while, that if there are any areas that you have been rendering findings on or that made this top 10 list, hopefully this webinar will shed some light on the area compliance and possible ways to maintain compliance. So we're going to get right on to the top 10, and right at the top here we have coming in number 10, section 7.2, which is the section on verification and validation, verification and validation of methods. So basically it goes without saying, requirement is under 7211 that the laboratory shall use appropriate methods and procedures for all laboratory activities and where appropriate for evaluation of the measurement uncertainty, as well as statistical techniques for the analysis of data. So for those items that are under your scope, our assessors technical assessors should be technically competent in the area they are assessing, should be able to determine whether the organization is using an appropriate method. I'll give you one example up here, and actually it's one of the methods that's depicted up here. Top left corner, you see Handbook 44. Handbook 44 covers a wide array of things. A lot of folks that do scales and balances will utilize methods from this document to perform calibrations, and I am the calibration program manager at PJLA to perform scale calibrations. This method is fine for industrial and commercial applications. However, it's not an appropriate method for doing analytical or laboratory type balances. So if this method was being used as an example for doing analytical balances, it may very well be written up as a nonconformance under this section. So 7215, we talk about verification. The laboratory shall verify that it can properly perform methods before introducing them by ensuring that it can achieve required performance. A requirement here is that the records of this verification shall be retained. If the method is revised by the issuing body, verification shall be repeated to the extent necessary. So this is an area where perhaps you want to expand your scope. You're a testing provider, you want to get into electrical testing, something new. You're a calibrator, you want to start calibrating pipettes, for example. Basically, you have to verify that you can operate the method and achieve the intended results prior to actually having them performed for customers and prior to having them added to the scope of accreditation. So in an example, say if you are an accredited lab, if you want to expand your scope, just make sure that you have some sort of record that you verified it. Got some examples here. Sure. May consist of, again, you just have to maintain a record showing that it was done. So perhaps you have a known reference value where you can compare it to the results of your methods. Proficiency testing, you'll have to do proficiency testing anyway as per the requirements in PL3. Perhaps you can go ahead and get proficiency tests as a way of verification of your methods, or even an internal proficiency test with repeatability checks. And also incorporate the value of your uncertainty into your average values, hence perhaps an internal normal analysis could be a possible way to maintain those records of verification. Now we're going to talk about validation. So basically, you see the requirement in there. This is if you're not using, if these are basically lab developed methods, or you have a nationally recognized method that you may be deviating from, then you have to validate the method. So the requirement is you shall validate non-standard methods, laboratory developed methods, and standard methods used outside their intended scope or otherwise modified. The validation shall be extensive as necessary to meet the given application of field of application. So under here we have some additional FYI, sort of like they're not requirements, but they're sort of like guidance that's within the standards. Gives you there, particularly under note 1, you have some examples of how to validate a method. Validating any biases, perhaps by looking at the value and the uncertainty, and see if there's something that's some sort of bias that's contributing to the uncertainty. Systematic assessments of factors influence the results. Perhaps temperature has a systematic effect on the final result, which can, of course, be verified through modifying that external factor that's affecting the tester calibration. Testing method robustness through variation of controlled parameters such as incubators, temperatures, volume dispensed. Comparison of results achieved with validated methods, or interlaboratory comparison, again a proficiency test, which all these are methods of verification. So if you are writing your own procedure, you're introducing them, just bear in mind that you need to validate them, which you would want to do anyway. Make sure your method is going to achieve the intended results, and of course maintain a record of those validations. No, still under selection verification of methods. That basically need to ensure that it uses the latest valid revisions of a method unless it's not appropriate to do so. When necessary, the application of the methods shall be supplemented with additional details to ensure consistent applications. So basically, if you're using an ASTM type method, for example, you want to make sure you're still operating off the latest and the greatest. So they are subject to review and they are subjected to revision. I did sort of highlight here a requirement during the management review, and this is one of the inputs: suitability of policies and procedures. So if anything else during the course of the year, this may be a time to go back and look at the external procedure. Make sure, hey, it's still current. See if it is out for review. See if it has been revised. Recent example, ISO 8655 for doing pipettes, for example, was just revised this year. Doing assessments, I knew that, and I had a couple of occasions where, hey, this was news to the organization, that hey, they were unaware that it was revised. Just bear in mind, if anything else, perhaps during a management review, this is a good time to go back under that input, 892C. Look at those procedures, make sure that you're operating off the latest and the greatest. Okay, going down to number 9, this is under improvements. So a requirement under improvement is the organization shall seek feedback, both positive and negative, from its customers. The feedback shall be analyzed and used to improve the management system, laboratory activities, and customer services. So I underlined and I bold-faced seek feedback. That's the key here. The organization has to actively seek feedback. It's not the customer or your clients coming to you and just giving you voluntarily feedback on your service to them in the form of say an email or them actually coming to you to relay information back to you regarding the testing or calibration activity that you may have performed. So this is seeking feedback. There's a note there that gives examples. One thing that comes to mind, first of all, is doing customer surveys. So yes, you are, if you do send out surveys, you are actually seeking feedback. Hopefully it will give you some good information of where you can actually analyze, as the requirement says, to improve your management system, laboratory activities, and customer services. So with surveys, though, I've heard this more than once. Hey, we sent out 100 surveys and we only got 2 back. Well, you are seeking feedback, but it's not being very effective. So bear in mind, there are other methods. One thing I would often sort of interject there is, hey, you still have to seek feedback, perhaps shortly after your organization has provided a service to one of a customer, perhaps an on-site service, where you would call the customer shortly thereafter. Customer may even appreciate the fact that you're following up, making sure everything went as planned. And things you'd want to know anyway. Was the technicians on time? Hey, were they professional? Did they go over the reports for you? So it does, of course, first thing that comes to mind is surveys. However, you just don't, however, sure you're doing it because the standard says you have to do it. Hopefully the survey would actually, the method in which you're seeking feedback would actually benefit your organization other than fulfilling a requirement here. All right, moving on down the list, section 7.7 is ensuring the validity of results. So this is something, as you see, you'll have to have a procedure for, as specified there in 7.7.1. and this is a procedure for the monitoring the validity of results. The resulting data shall be recorded in such a way that trends are detectable, and where practical, statistical techniques shall be applied to review the results. This monitoring shall be planned and reviewed and shall include, where appropriate but not limited to, and I'm not going to read through all those. You can see what's there. Some of the more popular ones that I see worked in to the quality system would be intermediate checks on equipment, control charting, even intra-lab testing or blind testing of samples. Have the results tested, have it submitted as a regular sample, another portion of the sample. Technician, as far as they know, it's blind, it's coming from a customer. See if they're providing the expected type results. So this section actually, unfortunately, didn't have the data to PL1, but this may actually be a lot larger in number, because sometimes these requirements may be listed under PL1 if they're not being there's a nonconformance in that area. So PL1 is Perry Johnson's policy for proficiency testing, and our policy is in harmony with what's required in 17025. And under 772, it is a requirement in the standard that you have to monitor your performance by comparison with results from other labs, where available and appropriate. This monitoring shall be planned and reviewed and shall include, but not limited to, participation in proficiency testing, going through a proficiency testing provider, perhaps 17043 accredited provider, or participation in interlab comparison other than proficiency tests. So in PL1, we refer to this as interlab comparison, where you would test your results against at least one other organization and compare the results in a meaningful manner. I also bolded where available and appropriate. Perhaps you have a little niche there where there is no third-party provider, or perhaps coordinating an interlab test would not be feasible. So in that case, and this may be an area where our assessors may have written nonconformances, intra-lab was done. So intra-lab is just done within the confines of your organization. The results you're comparing them to are maintained internally, so you're not going outside. So in that case, and this is not referenced in 17025, but in PL1, for intra-lab comparison, that would be something that you would have to put a request for in writing, stating why third-party and interlab is not feasible, and then you have to basically specify how the intra-lab would be conducted and how the results would be analyzed. This will be submitted to PJLA headquarters for approval. So that may be an area where nonconformances have been written, where proficiency testing was done through intra-lab, where it hasn't been approved, and in a particular case would not be approved. If there are third-party providers out there that's been identified, then chances are it will not get approved. The organization would either have to do a third-party or an interlab test. All right, moving down the list here, number 787 actually is the section on corrective action. Now, this is sort of a surprise to me. This sort of prompted up this year. It hasn't been there in the past. This is one of the top areas. I'm speculating here, but I feel that perhaps the area of doing a cause analysis may be in an area for nonconformances. I know one thing as a PJLA assessor, we have our system of checks and balances. So if our nonconformances are closed, one thing we do require is your internal corrective action report. So in part of that should be doing a root cause analysis or a cause analysis. And if the executive committee member feels that, hey, this it's not a true root cause, often I know in the past it's just been a reciting what the problem is. It would get kicked back to the PJLA assessor, which may have prompted a little bit more attention in this area. So with corrective action, it has to be initiated when a problem exists. Remedial action can easily be confused with corrective action. Remedial action or correction is taken to rectify the mistake. Corrective action is an action to eliminate defined nonconformances. And the key here is with corrective action, you want to prevent reoccurrence. So correction, sort of putting a Band-Aid on there, going to fix the issue at hand. Corrective action is where you really look at that root cause, and then you take corrective action to address the root cause. Give an example here. So perhaps you issued a test report and there was some issues with it. Customer called and you decided to reissue the report. That would be a correction. Issuing that one report does not put anything in place to prevent a reoccurrence. Perhaps this is the third time you got to call in this month about issues with reports that were submitted to customers. In this case, hey, you might want to do a little bit more than a correction, perhaps dig a little deeper in there, perhaps look at the review and authorization of reports to assure that they're not going out there without errors in there. Like this picture here, what I'm speaking of, we have a weed growing out of the soil there. Root cause analysis, so sort of depicting here. We can correct this issue if we see this coming up on our lawn. We can go pluck out the vegetation at the top, but hey, it's going to look nice. You're going to fix it here for a while, but in order to prevent a reoccurrence, hey, we need to get at the roots. So root cause. So ideally, we would get at those roots to prevent that weed from reoccurring. So sort of hopefully making an analogy there between a corrective action in your organization and perhaps a weed coming up in your lawn and how that could be annoying, and you can correct it or you can take corrective action to prevent it from happening again. All right, we're on number 6, which is a favorite here. This is 7.6 measurement uncertainty. So this is in line with PJLA's policies, PL3, our policy on measurement uncertainties. A lot of these requirements are also captured in there. So the requirement here, very first, is laboratories shall identify the contributors of measurement uncertainty. When evaluating measurement uncertainty, all contributors that are significant, including those arising from sampling, shall be taken into account using appropriate methods of analysis. So that sounds a lot like an uncertainty budget, which is basically where you identify, you quantify, you combine, and then you expand the uncertainty. So that goes hand in hand with this requirement in 761, which is required in PL3. Preparing uncertainty budgets. So this is an area that came in at number 6. I know if I was to speculate for calibration labs, though, folks that are initial accreditation, this seems to be one of the initial stumbling blocks. If you expand your scope of accreditation, bear in mind you have to evaluate uncertainty and submit those uncertainty budgets. So I talked about calibration there. You folks that are testing organizations, been involved in some testing assessments, not technically, more quality related with other assessors. One thing sort of noted that, hey, for a testing lab, this is not an area you can ignore. The standard does require testing labs to consider uncertainty, not necessarily to report it, but to consider it when performing tests. You see the requirement there. Shall evaluate uncertainty methods, uncertainty, where the test methods preclude rigorous evaluation of measurement, and estimation shall be masked based on the understanding of theoretical principles or practical experience of the performance of the methods. And there's notes provided in the standards for some additional guidance, and I captured those 2 notes there. So in testing lab, it could be captured in the methods, or perhaps need to make a reasonable estimation provided with statistical analysis that often incorporates repeatability studies. But just bear in mind, this is something that, hey, it's not just a calibration requirement. There is testing labs do have to determine how they evaluate uncertainty and what bucket it might fall in there, whether it's included in the methods or it's included in what's specified there in note 1 and note number 2. Alrighty, going down the list here, we're at number 5, 6.6, externally provided products and services, which this area here combines purchasing and subcontracting. So right here is a requirement that states the laboratory shall have a procedure and retain records. So once again, when you have a procedure, you have a document in place, a flow chart or something showing how it's done, and then you have a record showing what was done. So here under 662, under externally provided products and services, procedure and retain records for defining, reviewing, and improving the laboratory requirements for externally provided products and services. B, key here, defining the criteria for evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, of reevaluation of external providers. So that would be, for example, if folks that are doing your calibration, criteria could be, and particularly if traceability is needed, that your calibrators would be 7025 accredited to perform that specific calibration, hence assuring traceability. So that's what we mean by criteria. It could be other things in there, perhaps turnaround time, testimonials, things like that. Could it be other criteria for approving a vendor? Ensuring the externally provided products and service conforms to the laboratory's established requirements, or when applicable to relevant requirements of this document, 7025, before they are used or directly provided to the customer. And then last but not least, taking any actions arising from the evaluation of, monitoring of performance, and reevaluation of the external providers. So once again, as an assessor, what we typically do here is sample. All of our assessments are sampling. So typically I would sample, say, what I consider a critical supplier, perhaps a calibrator, where I would say, hey, let me see the record. And where this particular supplier has been evaluated, the criteria is established, i.e. perhaps 17025. Monitoring can be established. Hey, accreditation is not a one-time thing. It's something that has to be maintained. So continual accreditation could be established as the criteria for monitoring and reevaluation of your external providers. So you have flexibility on showing how a record that these requirements are being met. Back in the old 2005, you had to list those approved. I see, hey, I had to list them. You had an approved vendors list. No longer have to list the approved vendors. However, you have to maintain records of their evaluation, monitoring, and reevaluation. How I often still see that approved suppliers and vendors lists being utilized. And I see these requirements incorporated in there, such as columns added for identifying that criteria, for identifying next time they need to be monitored, which may be the expiration of a 9001 or 17025 recognition. All right, moving on down the list, number 4, This is internal audits. Internal audits is a formal laboratory activity that must be performed in accordance with a predetermined schedule. Laboratories may choose to conduct a full laboratory audit annually or biannually or audit parts of the system every month. So we'll look at the requirements here. So under 8.1, you shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the management system, A, conforms to the laboratory own requirements of its management system, including the laboratory's activities and the requirements of this document. So we're going to dissect this a little bit more. At planned intervals. So how often do you have to do an internal audit? You have to do them by a predetermined schedule, and that predetermined schedule would need to be defined somewhere within your quality management system. So looking for the audit to cover all activities over a reasonable period. You have flexibility there. It may be inconvenient to audit all activities in a single audit. It can be spread over quarterly or monthly audits. The schedule for such audits can be conveniently drawn as a matrix covering, for example, a year in which dates are set for each part of the quality system. Okay, dissecting a little bit more to provide information on whether the management system conforms to the laboratory's own requirements for its management system, including the laboratory activities. So have the phrase here, words are meaningless without intent to follow through. So in your internal quality management system, oftentimes you have a top tier document, quality manual, followed by perhaps supporting procedures, or you have required procedural information such as purchasing. That's a method of a section that requires a procedure. So basically, if your quality manual is stating how you comply with these areas of the standard, you need to go back and assure that, hey, what you're saying is actually what you're doing. Hey, you're going to monitor your suppliers every 6 months. Hey, that's a requirement, particularly if you say shall in your quality system. So your internal audit should cover those requirements that you place on yourself in your quality management system, particularly when you're stating how you can comply with the requirements of the standard. And of course, your internal audit should provide all information on whether you conform to the requirement of this document, being ISO IEC 17025-2017. So with this, you want to see a good, make sure that all the applicable requirements are subjected to the internal audit. Folks often will use a checklist. We actually have one on our website under our documents. It's called an LF56, I'm sorry, checklist. The same one our assessors use. A lot of folks do use that to assure they can look at the applicable requirements, make sure that they're being looked at during the internal audit. And then last but not least, ideally provide information on whether the management system is effectively implemented and maintained. Perhaps not a non-conformance, but some opportunities for improvement could come out of the internal audit. All right, common findings, making our way down the list. Number 3 is personnel. So again, we have this requirement here under 625. We see a requirement for both procedures, something saying how it's done, and a record showing what was done. And we have a listing of things such as determining the competence requirements. It can be done, for example, competence requirements can be defined in job descriptions, postings. Selection of personnel, B. Records could be postings, interview notes, competency cross-references. Training of personnel, training attendance and agenda, for example, could be maintained as records. Supervision of personnel and the training records, perhaps the supervisor signs off on that. Authorization of personnel. You got various tests or calibrations under your scope. there comes a point in time where, hey, training is done and you've determined the individual can now perform the test or calibration independently on behalf of your organization. You have to capture that, and that could be for example, an authorization matrix, or perhaps just a sign off on the training record. Just got to capture that date where they are authorized to perform those activities. Monitoring the competence of personnel. So I got new there. That was new in the 2017 when it was revised. So again, you have to specify how this will be done. So you would determine how to monitor. This can utilize such vehicles as checking personnel data and reports, or participation in interlab or intralab testing. Other methods could be recertification, written test, perhaps a follow-up. Once that authorization has been granted, a follow-up after 60 days, assuring that, hey, that training was effective. So ways to monitor, which is a requirement here under 625F. Here we got another authorization here. Shall authorize personnel to perform specific laboratory activities, including but not limited to development, modification, verification, and validation of methods, analyzing of results, including statements of conformity or opinions and interpretation. And then C, report review and authorization of results. So an expanded matrix, for example, can be used to incorporate these authorization. I want to hit on that report review and authorization of results. That's a separate authorization than just being able to perform the calibration. Perhaps over there we have a pipette. You're doing a test that utilizes that pipette, or you're actually calibrating pipettes. So the individual should be authorized to perform the calibration. If that individual, and I see this a lot with smaller organizations, the tester sometimes will, or calibrator will sometimes also sign off and issue the report. Well, that authorization should be also captured, that they're not only authorized to do the particular test or calibration, however, they're also authorized to review and authorize and issue reports. And you'll see here, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag, but that's something we're going to look at here because that's a requirement under reporting, which, lo and behold, there it come in here at section 7.8. We're getting down to the bottom here. That was number 2 area where we wrote our most nonconformances. So reporting the results. So it's broken down into various sections there. So 17025 is for testing, calibration, and sampling. So this area here starts off with combining all 3, and then you have various sections for each one of those, and then various sections for making statements of compliances, amendments to report, and opinions and interpretation. So here I sort of crammed everything onto one slide. There's a lot of requirements here under everybody. Each report shall include at least the following, unless the lab has a valid reason for not doing so, thereby minimizing any possibility, misunderstanding, or misuse. Good idea if you're doing your internal audit is to maybe pull some real live animals, go down this list, make sure everything on here, there is a shall there, unless you have a valid reason for not doing so, that these need to be on the report. Some of the things I find as an assessor when I'm going through, if I had to guess, is some of the ones that are most frequently missed here, or maybe not really understood, is, again, the date of issue. You see J there. That is, even if it's the same as the date of the test or calibration, 2 days has to be captured here. So even if it is the date, that needs to be specified on the report. That is not just the date of test or calibration, it also is the date that it was reviewed and issued to the customer. Same here as who authorized the report. You can see that is one of the requirements. Again, if the same individual is doing the testing and that's specified on the report, It also needs to be specific that they also authorize or release the report, or perhaps you have another layer there. You have perhaps a quality manager before reports are issued to customers. Then you have someone you authorized within your organization to review those reports and sign off. That individual will need to be captured on the report. There are just a couple things that are here, but you can see the long list of items that needs to be on the report. H comes sort of jumps out at me here. That's the data receipt. That's only if it's critical to the validity of the application. Of course, you have to have the data test or calibration. An example that comes to mind here is back when I used to do moisture testing for grain. We used to have to test those samples within a set period when they came in, because after a while they tend to lose their composition, and you're going to lose the integrity of the original sample that was issued, or excuse me, submitted. Statements of conformity. This is an area that I know initially when the standard was a transition from 2005 to 2017, this new concept of a decision rule was put into the section on reporting. So you see the requirements there: a statement of conformity to a specification, a standard provided to laboratory. Shall, a requirement, document the decision rule employed, taking into account the level of risk, such as false accepts, and statistical assumptions associated with the decision rule employed. So what the heck is a decision rule? You can see right there, that's defined right there in the standard definition that comes out of there. And it's a rule that describes how measurement uncertainty is accounted for when stating conformity with a specified requirement. So that is when you are stating on a report that a sample or an artifact, you tested it and it passed, or it failed, or perhaps you say intolerance, out of tolerance. When you make statements like that, you're making a statement of conformity. So with that, you have to, as standard states, you have to document the decision rule that was employed. Sort of hopefully depict it a little bit more here, what we're referring to. Here we have little rectangular diamond-shaped values that they represent perhaps the recorded reading. And those little end bars there around that diamond, that's the uncertainty. And then we have the upper and lower specs limit. So in case A, for example, we have a value, then we have that little gray area of uncertainty. That falls right there. It falls within those limits. So with that, taking measurement uncertainty, we could definitely say it passes. Going on to case B, hey, the value passes, but if you look at the end bars there, they sort of creep out. So the value passes, but hey, with uncertainty being taken into account, it may not. On the other case C, hey, the value actually does not pass. It's out of the specifications. However, if we take uncertainty into account, it may actually be a pass. And then case D, you can see both the values and then the uncertainty bars there, they're out of the specification limit. So that with that, taking an uncertainty into account, hey, we can state that it passes or it fails, whatever the case may be. So uncertainty statement could be if you are truly taking it into account, you're doing some sort of guard banding. Accounting for uncertainty will be taken to mean that 95% confidence level that the measurement result plus or minus the expanded uncertainty shall be totally within the spec limits. So in those cases where it was not, perhaps it value passed and the uncertainty may have kicked it over to where it would not pass, you can't state it passed. Perhaps you could state, we used to coin the phrase pass indeterminate or fail indeterminate. When I was on the other side of the table, I used to identify those with an asterisk and then defined it at the bottom. But the requirement is here, decision rule, it could be anything from simple acceptance to strict guard banding. And under 713, just sort of getting off track here, it needs to be agreed to the customer, by the customer, somewhere along the lines, and it needs to be presented and agreed. And under here, under reporting the results, it's also got to be documented on the test or calibration report. All right, that takes us down to number 1. And actually, this is a repeat from 2021, equipment. So equipment comes in, section 6.4 is in an area where PJLA assessors wrote the most findings in 2022. So we're going to look at some of the requirements here that perhaps may have contributed to this being making the top number 1 spot here. So the laboratory shall verify that equipment conforms to specified requirements before being placed or returned into service. So, you know, ideally, yes, you have some sort of limits there, perhaps established control charts. You're going to get to calibrating too. Some folks might just have to have them calibrated. They have to verify, hey, it's operating within specified requirements. Under 6.4.5, the equipment used for measurement shall be capable of achieving the measurement accuracy or measurement uncertainty required to provide a valid result. So perhaps they have a thermometer over there, sort of pictured on the right. If you're required to record temperature within 0.01 degrees C, and that thermometer is only perhaps able to report within whole degrees C, then that might be an example where a nonconformist could be written up in this area for not having the required equipment to achieve the accuracy that's needed. Calibration. So specifies here under equipment, measurement equipment shall be calibrated when the measurement accuracy or measurement uncertainty affects the validity of results, and or calibration of equipment is required to establish the metrological traceability of the reported results. If equipment is a part of your uncertainty, or if you need traceability, your equipment would need to be calibrated and would need to be calibrated from a traceable source. This is for equipment that are under 6.4.9. It's needs to be removed for whatever reason. It was giving questionable results, not overloading, mishandled, something that happened where the integrity of the equipment has been determined and it could have an effect on your results. So basically assure that your equipment is, if it is not being used and it has been subjected to given false results and is need a repair, that it's labeled and isolated as being out of service, and is to be in that matter until it is brought into service and determined that it's operating appropriately and is able to remove that label and continue with your laboratory activities using that equipment. Intermediate checks under 6.4.10. When intermediate checks are necessary to maintain confidence in performance of equipment, these checks shall be carried out according to a procedure. So intermediate checks for you folks that are doing testing, I see often utilize things like spikes and blanks, things like that. Sort of have these things built into your testing project. Your testing that you're performing, where say, hey, if equipment was say drifting, that hey, you have enough analysis that hey, would it reflect these known values? It could be a controlled reference material, or a spike, or a blank would be an example here. Calibrators, you have an analytical balance there. Checking your balance, for example, say on a daily basis, weekly day basis, or monthly basis. That would be an intermediate check on that equipment. Want to make sure that you have predetermined limits of acceptance. So for each of these intermediate checks, yes, it's great that you're doing, but you sort of have to have predefined limits of acceptance where if these intermediate checks fall outside, then you would pretty much have to stop testing, do an investigation, and try to get things back onto a state of statistical control. So one thing I'd sort of like to interject here, also with these intermediate checks, folks, non-conforming calibration or testing results. That is section 710 in the standard. So oftentimes when I see where this needs to be followed is when you have equipment, if you send it out for calibration and it came back, those as found values came back as being out of tolerance, that means you were using it while it was out of tolerance, and that protocol would need to be followed. And 710 would require you to basically you have to go and do an impact analysis. So you would have to go back and you would have to look at every calibration or test that equipment was used for since it was last determined to say be within tolerance, and see if it impacted any of your results that you put out. Worst case scenario, you would have to do some recall there. So how far do you have to go back? Well, if you didn't have any intermediate checks in place, then you'd have to basically go back until the last time you had it calibrated and it was determined to be within tolerance. It could have gone out of tolerance the day after you got it back or the day before you sent it off to get calibrated. Unless you have a system of intermediate checks, you really have no defense other than to go back the whole year. So if you do have a good system of intermediate checks, perhaps you do them every month, where you would perhaps check that balance or record that data. And you can go back and perhaps determine, of course, you would have it run your intermediate check shortly after it was determined to be within tolerance. If you have a good system of intermediate checks, that could cut back on the risk of non-conforming work, where you may be able to pinpoint, hey, it looks like it may have started drifting here. Okay, that does it. So that does our top 10 list for 2022. So bear with me one moment here. I'm going to go through these questions here. Yeah, this is live TV, so I'm reading them as I see them here. Records. Okay, internal audit. Records obtained for how long? I'm not sure what you're referring to there, if it's a particular part of the standard. I can tell you with PJLA, as far as records for quality systems, everything's game through the accreditation cycle, which for us is 2 years. We come on site every 2 years unless there's reasons for us to come more often. Internal audit, if a company is small and has only a few qualified audit, the auditing processes will begin to overlap. Is it okay to audit your own processes? Any example of simply stated decision? Excuse me. I think I'm into another question there. I would say, yeah, you could do that, but you have to ensure that impartiality is maintained. So it's kind of hard to do that. Ideally, yes. You would have folks not auditing their own work. That's an area under personnel also that's authorized. So it's all laboratory activities. So whoever's doing your internal audits, you should authorize them, and you should have competent requirements for fulfilling that role. You also meet the internal auditor would also have to meet the impartiality requirements in the standards. So somehow with folks auditing their own work, you should be able to address, hey, how is impartiality going to be maintained? Could be kind of hard there, but I can understand, resources could be limited. Perhaps, one thing with root cause analysis, we talked about that in corrective action. Yeah, for example, I've seen some good internal audits. I've seen some internal audits that are just check marks. I could have been done, not saying it was, but it could have been done 10 minutes before I walked in the door. If I come in and I write 29 conformances for 2 years in a row, and you're doing an internal audit, yeah, root cause could be, hey, your process for doing internal auditing. But I hope I answered your question there. It's kind of a sticky one there. I can understand, how that, could suit your organization as far as your resources, but somehow you're just going to have to be able to maintain the impartiality somehow. Oh, sorry, getting a lot of questions in here. Hang on, I got to scroll back up. Any examples of simply stated decision rule on a test reports, or are there common terms we should look up? And actually, I'm going to steal my thunder a little bit. Actually, next month, and I'm going to present that on my next slide here. The concept of uncertainty in testing is going to be discussed with our testing program manager. Bear with me 1 minute here. I'll make sure I give you the right documents. I'm still here. I'm just looking something up here. I'm sorry. What I was looking up is an ILAC guidance document. I couldn't remember the exact number. It's if you want a good resource for decision rule, ILAC, that's International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, which we as PJLA is part of the ILAC MRA. You can search ILAC guidance document. Excuse me, guidance document. So it's actually ILAC G8, or excuse me, I'm getting it wrong here. To the cover here. Never remember if it's G8 or G9. It's G8, I'm sorry. That is a guidance document that ILAC has presented for decision rule. It looking at your question here, goes into some detail of various decision rules and how they can be documented. Also, actually, I mentioned all of our webinars have been recorded, so you can go back and you can listen to some of my past webinars. I actually did specific webinars on statement of conformity and decision rules, where I go through the requirements. I go through some examples, and I do hit on testing there. No, we didn't have too many non-conform. Well, it didn't make the top of the 10 list anyway on section 401. Talking about interlaboratory, we need more than one result to compare our results. Bare bones minimum, an interlab comparison is a comparison of yourself and another organization. Ideally, yes, you can do it with just 2 organizations. Problem with that, though, let's say they don't agree. Okay, so it could be you, it could be them. If you only have two folks that are involved there, then it's kind of hard to determine which who needs to. It could be both organizations, but it could be a way of showing compliance, of comparing your results to outside organizations and showing that, hey, perhaps doing an e-normal analysis, that they are in agreement. But a problem may exist. Hey, if they don't show, say that e-normal analysis fails, well, what are you going to do? Is it you or them? Basically, in that case, hey, you'll have to take some sort of corrective action to rectify the failed PT result, which may incorporate redoing or incorporating another organization there. I'm assuming that's what your question is. Doing an interlab comparison. Yes, it could be bare bones minimum. It's yourself and one other organization. For a small, well, just getting in a management review, I didn't make our list. For a small lab, such as 2-people lab, what would be the best way to do management review? Since we talk and discuss in each other almost every day, our science and technology is proprietary. How would we? Okay, excuse me. Getting into another question there. Best way to do a management review, you talk about it you basically talk about things every 2 days, or 2 days, I'm sorry. 2 individuals that you communicate every day. Management review, you have to have a record of. Same as internal audit. How often do you have to do one? You have to do one during predetermined schedules. You have to maintain records of a management review. So, yeah, I would think it would be a good idea perhaps to the management review requires required inputs to be discussed and recorded and outputs to be discussed and reported. That's a requirement, whether you're a 2-person lab or a 100-person lab. So whatever works for you, you just have to create a record in a predetermined schedule. Hey, you could look at this template perhaps you put together where you have all the required inputs and outputs in there. Perhaps set some time aside periodically to maybe not go through the whole thing, but perhaps look at some of them on a monthly, quarterly basis, whatever works best for you. But just assure that you establish that predetermined schedule, what works best for you, and that you are capturing all those required inputs and outputs. Our science and technology is proprietary. How would we justify the need for intra-laboratory since there is no one who can perform calibration? Okay, with that, couple things there. Well, proprietary normally don't fit the bill for a deviation from a third party, because basically if you do a proficiency test to a third party, they're looking for your results. It's up to you how you get them there. So you could provide a third-party provider your results, your degree of uncertainty. Your calibration method, that will stay with you. You're just interested, and the proficiency test is interested in your results and your degree of uncertainty. Where available and appropriate. Well, perhaps there is no third-party provider, and you have a niche there where, hey, coordinating an interlab comparison, there's nobody, within the U.S. or within your vicinity to coordinate it from. In that case, then yes, you can request an intra-lab test. An intra-lab test would be where perhaps 2 technicians will calibrate the same artifact and compare the results in a meaningful way. So with that, and this is defined in PL3, standard says where available and appropriate. In PL1, I'm sorry, PL1 is for proficiency testing. That would mean that you would put that request in writing. It would be on you to request an intra-lab test specifying again, why third party or interlab is not feasible, i.e. there are no third party providers. And for whatever reason, there's nobody within close proximity that we can conduct an interlab test with. And then you also have to define how you're going to compare the results and analyze the data in a meaningful way, i.e. I will have the senior technician run a test or calibration and have technician A and B run the same test or calibration, and I will compare the results by perhaps an e-normal analysis, which I see used a lot, would be the way to go then. If there is no third-party provider, and for whatever reason you cannot conduct an interlab test, and this is all defined in PL1, what you have to do, you can pursue an intra-lab test. But like I said, with proprietary, if that's the sole reason, and there are third-party providers, you know, like I said, they're not interested in your procedure or your equipment that you're using. You're going to be compared with other organizations. Your results, now how you got there, your uncertainty, you'll be assigned a code with third party. You could be lab number 123. You know your lab number 123, but you see other codes in there that are other labs. You have no idea who they are, and they have no idea who you are. Alrighty, thank you all. I think I reached the end. A lot of good questions there. Like I said, we were bouncing all over the standard today. So actually, before I go, let me just sort of gear up for next month. So next month, actually, we're going to have another presenter. I realize, you know, I'm a calibration person, and a lot of areas in testing I'm not versed in. And one of those areas I seem to get a lot of questions on is uncertainty in regards to testing labs. So next month, we're actually going to have Matt Sika, who is now PJLA's testing program manager, present in that area for testing, particularly testing Section 7.8, the evaluation of measurement uncertainty for testing laboratories. Matt has a wealth of experience, and I'm sure he'll dig a lot deeper than I did when I last did this topic when I was going over testing. And there may have been some questions which I could not answer. So mark it on your calendar, February 21st, which looks like it's a Tuesday. Same time, same station. I'll be back in March with another presentation on me. So again, I hope this was a informative webinar. Hope you can take advantage of Matt's presentation on in February, and I look forward to doing my next one in March. Thank you.